All right, thank you, Sid. And welcome you all for this final session of today. I am Gaurav Bhatnagar and I am a product manager at Databricks. Before we get started, a quick show of hands. How many of you all identify yourself as the data platform admins? All right, and how many of you all identify as the data practitioners, like the data engineers, scientists, or analysts? All right, we have a good mix. So the customer journey that we are going to start off with will resonate with both set of folks. I think Sid covered these slides, so sorry for being repetitive here. All right, so there's a team in an organization that wants to use the data lakehouse platform, but they have to wait. They have to wait because the admins in that organization want to ensure that the platform is used as per the organizational standards and policies. So the admins do their job and provision these environments. They provision the users and groups into those environments and grant them the desired level of access. Compliance, security, networking is of utmost importance, so those controls are configured. And then they go on to configure other cost-related controls to ensure that the platform is run in a cost-effective way, like ensuring the cluster profiles that are available for the data practitioners to use, and configuring budgets. And then they go on finally to configure other admin settings, like controlling access to the public internet, ensuring the desired set of libraries are installed on those clusters to jumpstart these teams. All this effort, and perhaps much more, has to go in before this one team can use the data lakehouse platform in production. But guess what? There is another team and another set of users that want to be onboarded, and the same investment has to happen again. This cycle does not stop as the organization continues to scale the use of the data lakehouse platform in that organization to more users, more teams, and every new project that comes up in the future. Configuring the right controls while meeting the compliance needs is important, but it does slow down the adoption of the data lakehouse platform in the organization. So in this section today, we'll talk about 3 factors that are important as you deploy and set up Databricks and scale it in your organization. Number 1 is who is doing what in your organization. What are the roles and what are the responsibilities? Number 2, how is your organizational structured, and how are you organizing workspaces within that structure? And number 3, the roles that we talk about, at what granularity are they doing the management? Are they operating at the organizational level, or are they operating at a more granular level? So let's start with talking about the first one. Understanding the roles and what their responsibilities are is critical because it lets you determine what permissions do these personas need? And more importantly, what permissions they don't need? The top box here identifies some of the core personas that interact with Databricks on a more frequent basis. The first one is a Databricks platform admin. And this is the set of people who are managing the Databricks resources. They are provisioning the environments either for their team to use or for other teams to use. The second one is a team admin. These folks are working in their specific projects and their specific teams, and they are managing just within their business unit or teams. The third one is a data admin, which is controlling and governing access to the data assets in your organization. And then the last 3 in the top box are the end consumers of the platform, the data practitioners who are using the product on a daily basis. The bottom box lists some of the stakeholder personas which don't necessarily interact with the platform on a day-to-day basis, but work very closely with the Databricks platform admins to make sure that the compliance requirements for the organizations around security, privacy, networking, all of those are met. So next, let's talk about how these roles are operating in the different setup. The second important factor, how are your organizations structured and how you can organize workspaces in that setup. And then how those roles operate in that setup. So the first pattern here is a common pattern where you have an organization which has different business units, and each business unit may have 1 or more teams working under it. Now, in this setup, the workspaces are organized based on the environment type. So there is a workspace for dev, there's a workspace for staging, and there's a workspace for production. And all the teams across the different business units in your organization are sharing these set of workspaces and working against them. Now for isolation, each workspace connects to a different cloud account, and there are cloud resources provisioned in that cloud account. So the dev workspace will talk to the dev storage, and the prod workspace will talk to the production storage. And then there is a metastore, the Unity catalog, which is sitting, and that is being shared by all these workspaces across the board. Now let's see how admins operate in this setup. In this setup, the management boundary is the organization, which maps to a Databricks account. So the Databricks admin are managing all these workspaces for the entire organization. They are configuring the users, giving them the required permissions, managing the cost, all of that for the entire set of workspaces that are owned by the organization. There are data admins, which is, again, configuring and managing access to the data, which are, again, part of the same data platform team from which the Databricks admin come from. And then for the cloud resources, there is a separate team, the Cloud Ops admin team, which is responsible for managing the cloud account and the cloud resources that get provisioned in that. There are 3 things to note in this setup. Number 1, this setup is probably has the least management overhead. Common configurations which need to be repeated for each workspace, like configuring users, groups, managing their entitlements, all of that need to be done for a very small set of workspaces. Number 2, sharing is very simple. Sharing of Databricks assets is very simple in this setup. And number 3, as you continue to use this pattern, make sure you are aware of the Databricks platform limits across the different Databricks resources. With that, let's talk about the second pattern, which is a decentralized setup. In this setup, there is an organization with, again, different business units, but in this one, each business unit may have presence in different regions. And there might be teams who are operating in different regions. Now, in this setup, the workspaces are organized by teams. So each team can have a set of dedicated workspaces that they own and manage and use. The cloud account will still be a dedicated cloud account for workspaces, and there will still be a single metastore that these workspaces share. Now let's see in this setup how the admins operate. Now in this setup, the difference is that the management boundary, instead of it being an organization, is a business unit or a team in that business unit. And so the admins in this case are the team admins who are working on those individual products. They assume the responsibility of the Databricks admin, but just for the scope of the set of workspaces that they own, not for the entire set of workspaces, but just for the dedicated set of workspaces that is being used by their teams. The data admins remain the same. They are still controlling access to the data. And for the cloud account, in this model, the team admin assumes the responsibility of managing the cloud account and the cloud resources as well. Now, this setup does offer more flexibility to individual teams and enable them to move faster, but it does pose challenges when it comes to org-wide compliance. Now, you can choose to adopt any of these patterns or a variation of this pattern as per your organizational needs. Irrespective of the pattern you choose to use, there are some common practices or best practices that you should adopt as you decide to deploy Databricks and scale it up in your organization. The first one is considering setting up a central data platform team. Now, this team is ensuring ongoing compliance as different teams in your organization are using Databricks. Consider investing and developing a dedicated and a highly repeatable template for managing, bootstrapping assets and managing them on an ongoing basis. So invest in automation helps with controlling cost over a period of time and reduces the margin of error when it comes to managing these environments and spinning them up. When you are automating, do remember to use service principals or service accounts for those automation jobs. And then wherever possible, manage these configurations centrally from the account console. Instead of having to manage them for each workspace, manage them centrally from the account console. And Sid will cover more of this in his section when he talks about it and give you more concrete examples on how this could be done. Cost management is critical, and consider having policies such that every resource, every Databricks resource is tagged, which helps you with cost attribution. And use cluster policies to make the use of the product simpler for the end users and maintain cost and control cost. We highly recommend using enterprise or premium SKUs because that gives you the right security knobs, which will be needed as you scale the platform in future in your organization. And the last one, perhaps the most important one, is limiting the number of workspaces that you choose to create. Think about creating a new workspace only for a very specific use case where there's a strong need for network isolation or a data isolation. Otherwise, minimizing set of workspaces is the recommended pattern here, as it reduces the management overhead. Now with that, I would like to invite Vicky from Plexure, who would like to share her real-world experience.
Awesome. I'm Vicky Avison. I'm a staff data engineer at Plexure, so I'm just going to be talking a little bit about how we've set up our Databricks platform and how we administer it. This isn't working. So just a little bit about Plexure to get started. So we are a mobile engagement company, and what this means is we work with other organizations like quick service restaurants to help them provide a really engaging customer experience through mobile applications, using things like targeted offers and loyalty programs. So we're gathering data across the whole of the customer journey, really, from viewing an offer to actually spending money in store. And we use all this data we're gathering to enrich the customer experience even further by making it more personal to them. So data is really at the heart of everything we do. So looking within Plexure, who are our data users? So we fall into that centralized model. We've got a central data platform team, which is actually our data engineering team. So we do data engineering, but we also wear a lot of admin hats. So Gaurav just talked about different types of admin, like data admin, Databricks admin, Cloud Ops admin. We kind of cover all of these roles within our data engineering team. But this doesn't mean the whole team actually needs admin access to all of these environments, because we use infrastructure as code to do our administration. I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. So also within the centralized data team buckets, we've got our insights analysts and data scientists. These are our heaviest data users within the business, and they're providing that centralized data science and analytics capability for the whole of Plexure. Then we also have software engineering teams dotted around the business. They're working on different parts of the Plexure product, and their parts of the product are obviously producing data, and they need to be able to look at that and do analysis on it. Then outside of that completely, we've got our customer support team. They're probably our heaviest data users outside the centralized data teams, because they're constantly needing to query data to respond to customer issues and requests. And then on the right, we've got the exec team, who are the exec team. They're looking for higher level views of data and dashboards, things like that. So that's who we've got in the business who are needing access to data. So I'll just walk through how we've set up our Databricks workspaces. So we do have a multi-workspace architecture, as you can see, with each workspace in individual AWS accounts. So we use Databricks for two distinct things. One is for developing and running our Spark data pipelines, and that's using the workflows, the jobs capability of Databricks. And then the other thing is interactive data exploration and analytics. So that's notebooks and Databricks SQL. So for our data pipelines, we follow a traditional software engineering lifecycle where we go through dev, QA, and then prod, and that's what these workspaces on the bottom are for. You'll notice we have multiple production workspaces, and that's because we work with multiple organizations. So each of these production workspaces is for one of those organizations. And these look identical, and we've got the same data pipelines running in all of them. The difference, of course, is the data is specific to that client. And having these separate workspaces means that that data is fully isolated and client data is never mixed up. The only people who actually have access to these job workspaces are the data engineering team currently, because we're the ones building and maintaining these pipelines. We will likely in future onboard the data science team to these workspaces as they start to productionize their machine learning workloads. Then on the top here, we have our exploration workspace, which is the one most of our data users across the business will have access to, and they won't actually really need to know the other ones exist. So this is where we're doing that interactive notebook development and that SQL development. And this, the clusters and the endpoints we have in this environment have read-only access to all the data produced by the other workspaces, but it can't write data to them. So just a bit about how we do identity management. Our IDP is Azure Active Directory, and we have set up skin provisioning and SSO for each of our workspaces. We have to do this currently for every single workspace, so this is a bit of a laborious admin task. But once it's done, then onboarding new users and groups into the environment is really, really simple. For example, if we want to onboard our customer support team, we just need to make a request to our AD admin to add that group to the enterprise application in Azure for our exploration workspace. When they do that, the customer support group will get synced into our exploration workspace. By default, they won't actually have access to do anything to begin with, so our data platform team need to grant them access to the things they need access to. For example, they'll probably only need access to Databricks SQL, not to the notebook environment, so we can set that up, make sure they've got access to all the data they need, and then they can log in via SSO, and they're good to go. And the great thing now is if a new person joins the organization, joins the customer support team, we don't need to do anything else because they'll just get synced across into that group and they'll be able to do what they need to do. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about an alternative approach for setting up our workspaces that we considered, which is using a single workspace instead of that multi-workspace architecture. And this is actually an architecture I've used in the past with Databricks, and it worked really well. So you can pretty much do everything I just described with a multi-workspace architecture. You can have your dev, QA, prod jobs all reading and writing just to their own data. You can set up your exploration clusters and endpoints that only have read access to that data. And you can configure your users so they only have access to the parts of the platform they need. So it's all great. There's some massive pros to using this approach rather than multi-workspaces. Everything's in one place, which really, really helps with that monitoring visibility side of things. And the admin side of things gets a lot simpler. For example, I just talked about how we had to set up SSO and user provisioning for every single workspace. Here, you've only got one, so you just need to do that once, and you're good forever. But the reason we didn't use this for Plexure, and Gaurav just mentioned this a bit earlier, is we needed some stronger data isolation than this provides. So with a single workspace, all of your compute is running within a single account, AWS account, and in a single VPC. And because we're working with multiple clients and we want their data to be completely isolated from each other, we needed that stronger isolation that comes with individual accounts and individual VPCs. So that was a really big reason we didn't go with this approach. And the other thing is, because we work with multiple clients, they're spread across the whole world. Some of them have really specific requirements about where their data can actually be stored in terms of AWS regions. And with a single workspace, you can only configure one region. It doesn't really work with the multi-region approach. So that's another big reason why we couldn't do this. Having said that, my personal recommendation would probably be to use a single workspace if you can, and then if you've got specific requirements, to branch out into the multiple workspaces. So just a little bit about how we administer our platform, and I did allude to this earlier. It's all automated through infrastructure as code. So we have our Terraform repository, and this contains all of our infrastructure as code for both Databricks and our supporting AWS resources like S3 buckets, VPCs, and IAM roles, things like that. So this is really awesome. It means our infrastructure is fully repeatable. We can define that once and then deploy to our multiple environments, so we can guarantee they're all the same and there's no drift. And we automate almost everything with Databricks through this. And the other great thing about this is we do our permissions through here, so we've got a really well-tracked view of why and when we change permissions. And anyone in theory could raise a PR on this repository to change permissions. So the data science team want more elevated permissions, they could raise a pull request, and then we could have a discussion on that and either approve or decline it. And then if it gets approved, we've got an audit trail of why that happened and the discussion that happened with it. Unfortunately, not everything can be administered through Terraform at the moment. So I just talked about SSO and user provisioning. We have to do that manually for each workspace. And the other thing that's not there at the moment is workspace settings. So if you're a Databricks admin, you'll know there's these binary settings, you can configure things like files and repos, cluster access control, table ACLs. They're currently not covered by the Terraform provider. So I'm just going to close off my bit with just some lessons we've learned over the past year of using Databricks, which is how long we've been Databricks customers. As I just said, the Terraform provider really is worth its weight in gold. This wasn't around last time I worked with Databricks, and it's really a game changer, and it would make our multi-workspace architecture really difficult to manage without it. But as I said, not everything's supported, and we do have to revert to manual administration. And then the other thing that wasn't around last time I worked with Databricks is that skim provisioning. And this also has been a game changer because it just makes it so much easier to onboard people to the platform rather than manually doing that every time. But again, that's a bit of a pain to set up with multiple workspaces. But once it is done, it is very beneficial. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Sid.
It's always nice to hear from experts such as Vicky with a lot of experience working with Databricks and real-world deployments. And thank you for taking the time to share your learnings with our community. This is a very interesting point in the presentation. Everything you've been hearing about so far has been all about features that are generally available, things you can go ahead and use as is. Even the Terraform module, which chatting with a couple of you, there are strong emotions about, you either love it or you wish there was UI, that also went into general availability just as we walked into Data and AI Summit. Everything I'm going to talk about in this segment are features that are under development and how you can then leverage these features to make administration easier, exciting, and scalable is what we'll cover. To jump in, we will talk about revamped account console, identity federation and account level identities, how with a single cross workspace Unity catalog metastore, you're able to onboard teams faster. We'll have a demo, and we'll then look at these best practices in the lens of these exciting capabilities which our team is building. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the account console. The account console is already in general availability for for AWS and Google Cloud, and it's in public preview for Azure. Now there's a very interesting change we're making to the account console. All of your workspace users, service principals, will now start surfacing in the account console from the workspaces individually. So you don't have to go into 5 or 6 different admin consoles to look at that list. This change will be rolling out to all customers in the coming weeks. So when you start seeing new users and SPs in account console, just know they're coming. I want to reassure you there is no change to the set of people who can access individual workspaces or who your account admins are. So when you see new users starting to pop up, that's just to provide you a single pane of glass. Don't try and remove them from the account console. They just help you manage things better. From that point on, you'll go ahead and start seeing additional features and capabilities light up. We want to work towards giving you more visibility for billing and cost administration. And then you'll also be able to configure a UC metastore. In time, you will see us start to bring in more enterprise-grade features, such as IP allow lists, into this console. So all of these settings that I just spoke about are in various stages of development. On the top right of the slides, you'll see the status as I go through some more features. These are all changes at the account level. But how does this change? What happens with workspaces? Let's dive into that. So the first feature I want to talk to you about is identity federation. In simple terms, this is about taking account level users, service principals and groups, and making them usable in individual workspaces. As a matter of convenience, we would have copied over your workspace level users and service principals to the account level. But it is the act of opting a workspace into identity federation that allows you to use those identities. Let me show you how with a visual. First, if you look at the model that exists before account level identities, you go ahead and configure skim synchronization into individual workspaces. Now, on the one hand, it's very convenient, as Vicky mentioned, the users at Plexure. But on the other hand, what happens if 3 more people need access to a workspace? Or if somebody goes ahead and creates a group in your organization, which can be used with Databricks, you have to go back to your identity provider, be that Active Directory, Okta, Auth0, or something else, and go back and update the set of groups who are allowed to access each workspace. I see a few heads nodding. For those of you who are in larger organizations, that means you may have to raise a ticket with the IT team or go bug the AD admin again, and they have 60 other things to worry about. So the model that comes into place with account level identities is that you get all of these identities directly available inside the account console. Now, if you wish to go ahead and update access to individual workspaces, you can directly do that from the account console without having to go back and update the groups that map to individual workspaces at your IDPs. As we move towards this new model, I want to talk about different types of workspaces. First, on your far left is your regular workspace, or what's a non-identity federation enabled workspace. In this case, we've already copied over your users and service principals to the account level. So what you are able to do is continue to create workspace local groups. On the bottom right is the new model. Any users, any groups you create will be account level groups. Now we realize and value that a lot of you have invested in Databricks, have existing production grade workspaces, so the middle segment is of relevance. Our model is pretty simple. Any existing workspace groups that you're already managing, you can continue to update their memberships. They don't go away. However, any new groups you create will be created at the account level. So this is how existing workspaces are being factored into the new model. How does this play out in terms of workspace access? So for instance, if you look at an account level object, such as Unity Catalog, those grants can be given to account level users and groups. But if you're inside a workspace and trying to share a notebook, you will do that with workspace level users and groups. There's no changes to this model, but I want to call out 2 restrictions at this time. First, in identity federation enabled workspaces, workspace admins can no longer create account level groups. Those will be done by the account admins. Second, for existing groups, for the groups that show up in your workspaces, it's only the groups directly assigned to that workspace. Both of these are things which we are phasing in to make this model easier for you to use, and over time, we expect to add more delegation capabilities. The next thing I want to talk about is how do settings play out in this new model. But before I do that, I'll quickly touch upon our best practices. First, you want to make sure you're synchronizing your users and accounts now to the groups to the account level using our account level scheme. There's a new type of token which has some security benefits called a scheme token, which you can utilize for this purpose. Even though we go ahead and synchronize identities now at the account level, I want to make sure you're still configuring your account level and your workspace level single sign-on separately for each. You can obviously watch your audit logs to make sure there is no SCIM or SSO configuration issues. As an IMPM, I will always encourage you to turn on multi-factor authentication. And in our model, you go ahead and configure this directly at your identity provider, and then that way when they hit Databricks, they've already authenticated. And like always, you want to trust your administrators. Now think about both your account admins and your workspace admins. How does this end up playing out when it comes to settings? I'll walk you through our new model. First, we want to make it easy for you to manage Databricks at scale. So as a result of that, you can go ahead and specify settings at the account level. Certain types of settings you can set defaults for and ask that they be enforced. For example, one of the settings we have in preview is whether users are allowed to use delta sharing to go ahead and share data from outside of that account. That may be a good candidate for one, which you enforce on all workspaces. Some other types of settings may be for convenience. So in those cases, you can allow the settings to be overridden at the workspace level. In either case, these will help you scale your usage of Databricks. All of the changes that you're making will be completely automatable, will be auditable, and these constraints will be consistently applied. Now I've been talking about some of these features for a few minutes. I think you're about ready for a demo, yes? All right, let's go in and take a look. Just to make sure that I don't tempt the demo gods too late in the evening, I've gone ahead and pre-recorded the demo, but if any of you want to test me, walk right up. I have this demo working on my laptop. Let's jump in and take a look. So we're starting off inside the new and revamped account console. Inside settings, if you go ahead and click on single sign-on, this is where you can go ahead and configure an Open ID Connect or a SAML-based identity provider. This will point to your external IDP for authentication. You click on user provisioning, and you can go ahead and click on regenerate token for SCIM. This is a special token which Databricks will create for you, and in combination with this token that's appearing on your screen momentarily and the URL, you can go ahead and configure your identity provider to start syncing your users and groups into Databricks. Great, so you have set up single sign-on, you've gone ahead and configured SSO. What happens? Let's jump to the user management tab. Here, you will now see both your existing users and service principals, which we copied over for easy visibility, as well as new users and groups you have created using account-level SCIM sync inside Databricks. Data engineers, we go in and take a look at the group and notice there's a couple of account-level users that are members of this account-level group. Next, let's jump to workspaces. And for our demo, I've gone ahead and created a prod and a dev workspace. If you go into the prod workspace, which might be representative of the type of workspace you use today, you'll notice that it's a traditional workspace. It has not been opted into the Identity Federation preview. Nothing changed for that workspace. And so I'll go into that workspace to manage it. However, as I come back, I'll now go ahead and take a look at a dev workspace. Now, let's say you're excited about all you've been hearing about all day and you want to go ahead and try out UC. Great. In this workspace, I've opted it into Unity Catalog, attached to Metastore, and therefore the workspace is opted into Identity Federation. Going into the Permissions tab, I notice these users and groups already have access to this workspace. I'm going to go ahead and edit the Data Engineers group, and because they're trusted, I'll go ahead and promote them to being workspace admins, all within this single UI via the account console. So this is how you're able to go ahead and manage more of your Databricks workspaces directly from inside the account console for easier manageability. Let's come back to the slides and take a look at what this means. First, if you notice how your Databricks workspaces are evolving, your data has been abstracted away from the individual workspaces. The bottom layer is all about UC, across workspace Metastore. We're also giving you a single pane of glass with the revamped account console. This is the layer at the top and the one we just looked at in the demo. Your SSO configuration can happen from an external identity provider. It should be configured at both your account as well as workspace level. And this can then have you administer Databricks in a single way without worrying about where your data resides on different cloud providers or in different regions. If you think about the slide that Gaurav presented at the start of the session, with a set of all of these enhancements, each and every one of those operations is now simpler. For example, because of the Identity Federation enhancements, you'll find it's easier to configure and synchronize identities, set up access control. Because of the new settings platform, for certain settings, it's easier to override them. In some cases, it's easy to let them be specified uniformly. Taken together, this makes Databricks easier to manage, more visible, and simpler to administer while becoming less error-prone. What this means in terms of the new model, I'd like you to walk away with 3 key takeaways. First, establish identity at the account level. Synchronize all your users and groups directly to the account. Second, embrace Unity Catalog as our new model for providing data governance, which are independent of the lifecycle of individual Databricks workspaces. And third, via centralized settings, which are in preview now with more being added over time, you can go ahead and make it easy, simple, and scalable to manage Databricks. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to invite Gaurav and Vicky back for any questions you might have. Any questions? Please.
Hello. We have a multiple workspace that's what you were saying. Like, each individual users all compete, even though they're in different workspaces. Now they're all into all type workspaces.
Right, great question. I'll repeat it for the audience. So the question is, they're using Azure Databricks, and they have configured different synchronizations from Azure AD to individual workspaces. How does that work in the new model? So in the new model, we'd encourage you, in the case of Azure Databricks, to go ahead and set up a tenant-level enterprise application inside Azure AD and synchronize those users and groups to Databricks account. Once they're available there, you can then go ahead and use them inside existing workspaces, as you do today. Thank you. Nice question. Any more? Yeah?
So we've set up SSO for every workspace we have, which is like we just do QA, dev, whatever. But we don't tell our users the URLs for their workspaces. They just go to like the My Apps area, or if it's like Okta, there's a similar thing. What will that look like if we only have one SAML provider?
So I think that if I may break that question down, the question is they have workspaces, they've set up individual SSO, and they haven't given URLs to their end users. So I think there are two types of things I'd like to talk about. First, when it comes to configuration, you still need to configure single sign-on separately at the workspace and the account level at this time. Over time, we're excited to look to possibly make that easier, but at the moment, that is the model. The second one, Gaurav, wondering if you'd like to take the part about letting people perhaps use account console, even if they're not account admins, to more easily manage workspaces.
Yeah, I think.
Come on up.
I think. The mic. Yeah. So with the new centralizing of settings in the account console, what is going to happen is not just the account admins are going to go to the account console and manage things. Other users will also be able to go to the account console and manage things that they were specifically given access to. So they can't still do like more privileged operations, but some of the operations that they can do. So they can still discover the workspaces that they have access to and be able to log in from there.
Okay.
Thank you.
For a user, it's like they're going to have to, in the future, it'll be kind of like a two-stage thing. Instead of just going directly to their workspace, they'll have to go to account admin and into the.
They can still directly go to the workspace, but depending on the model that you choose to deploy in your organization, they can go to the account console, and that is your story to land into these different workspaces.
Thank you. Go ahead. Makes sense. Thank you. So the question for the room was, what are the limitations around Active Directory? How many users and groups can you synchronize? Very nice question. We're looking to enhance the scale limits in the future. At this point of time, we support 10,000 users and service principals and 5,000 groups inside a single workspace or an account. But keep the feedback coming, and this is a limit we expect to enhance more in time as the usage of Databricks deepens.
So what we've set up is we have a service principal that is basically a Databricks admin. So it's the service principal that is the admin, and then that can obviously do everything in Databricks, so that deploys all our Terraform code. That makes sense. So our actual people who are working on the Terraform aren't the admins, but the service principal is. Yeah, the service principal is the superpowered one, but the people aren't, which I think is safer.
But that is a great question in general. Whenever you're running automation, be that for administering Databricks or otherwise, as security identity folks always want to think about the principle of least privilege. In that specific case, there's another group in the company that focuses on the Terraform module. I'm excited to connect you with them to see if there are other ways you can manage SPs while not making them super powerful in Databricks. No, makes sense. And there's a few more capabilities you're working on with service principals that are perhaps a bit premature to talk about today, but excited to get your feedback offline and cover more in future sessions. I think we're coming up on time. Any more questions? No? Thank you so much. Appreciate you staying back and have a good rest of the day.